ground flashed by underneath the train as I crouched in the glassless window. The railroad ties of the adjacent track were a blur under the metal rails. The wind whipped at my clothing and whisked away the blood coming from the cut down the left side of my face. The bottom of my left ear hung by a thread of cartilage and skin. Glancing toward the front of the moving passenger train, I saw another locomotive coming down the adjacent track, its light shining through the darkness. The two vehicles would pass each other soon, very soon. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the man with the missing front teeth and the bloody knife coming toward me. He was still grinning, blood still running down his chin. I had no choice. I had to jump. I trudged off the train platform and onto the train, my earbuds blaring music so I could stay awake during the ride. All I could think about was getting home to my bed. I wanted to sleep for a day, but I couldn't let sweet oblivion take me just yet. I'd fallen asleep more than once on the 30-minute ride out of town, causing me to miss my stop. It was hard to stay awake after working 12-hour days, 6 days a week for more than a year. The goal was to move into the city, but it seemed like little more than a pipe dream. I was the sole caregiver of my developmentally disabled brother, who was 5 years younger than me. He could do a lot of things on his own. He even held a part-time job at an adult daycare center in the city, helping with basic tasks. But he would never be able to live on his own. That was okay. I loved my brother and wouldn't dream of living without him. But that didn't make me feel any less tired after my long work days. And it didn't make my commute to and from the suburbs any less grueling. The train was pretty much empty, as always. I noticed a man down on the train platform who got into a different car toward the back of the train. He was a guy who often rode the same train, although we'd never exchanged greetings or anything. I always kept my earbuds in, lacking the energy to talk to strangers. I also noticed a couple of people in one of the forward cars as the train pulled up to the platform. A man and a woman, I thought. But I had this car to myself, which was fine with me. As I pulled off my backpack and sat down, the train pulled away from the station. Then I leaned over and pulled my wallet out of my back pocket so I could sit evenly. I shoved the wallet into my backpack, as I did on every other train ride. I got my ticket out and put it in the little metal bracket affixed to the seat back in front of me. I figured the conductor, who I was on a first-name basis with, would be by soon. Then I sat back and struggled to keep my eyes open, the music blaring into my ears. Someone touched my shoulder and I jumped, realizing as I sat up that I'd fallen asleep. I looked up to see the conductor, Hassan Ohabe, smiling down at me. He waited for me to pull out my earbuds before speaking.
Did you set an alarm?
I shook my head.
Forgot.
He tisked and shook his head.
I can't always be around to wake you up, my friend. Better set one. We're running right on time today.
I will. As Hassan was about to say something else, a thump came from the next car up, drawing his attention away.
What's going on up there?
I asked.
I don't know,
Hassan said, looking toward the doors between cars.
I gotta go check. Take care, Wes. Set that alarm. Yeah, thanks, Hassan. I'll see you tomorrow.
He moved off toward the next car. I watched him go through the first door, then lost him from sight as he went through the second door and into the next car. As I went to put my earbuds back into my ears, I heard a shout come from the car Hassan had gone into. Leaning out, I peered down the aisle, but I couldn't see anything past the door. There was a small window in it, but my angle didn't allow me to see through it with any sort of clarity. Putting my earbuds back into their case, I thought that taking a walk around wouldn't hurt. It would be hard for me to fall asleep on my feet. Leaving my backpack in the seat next to me, I stood up on the gently swaying train. As I moved toward the next car in line, I was at an angle that would allow me to see through the small windows of the two doors between the cars. But the second window was covered with something, preventing me from seeing through. I pressed the button on the first door, which slid open, revealing the small space between the cars. As I stepped up to the other door, I could see that the window was covered from the other side with a newspaper. Although most people read the news on their phones, I always saw a couple of older guys on my morning commutes who read newspapers. And it was common for them to be left lying on seats for anyone else who wanted to read them. What wasn't common was seeing them blocking one of the door windows. I pressed the door button and the portal slid open. Stepping through, I saw 2 pairs of feet sticking out into the aisle up ahead. The feet were hanging off the edge of the seats. It was as if 2 people were sprawled out on adjacent rows, trying to sleep. I saw no sign of Hassan anywhere. Moving up toward the feet, I glanced over to see a man lying limply across 2 seats. His eyes were closed, and his plain white button-up shirt was covered in blood. Panic building, I whipped my head to the left, seeing that there was a woman in the row across the aisle. She had stab wounds in her turquoise blouse, which was heavy with blood. Taking a step back, I glanced once more at the man, jumping when I saw that his eyes were open and he was smiling.
Ha!
He cried, sitting up.
Got you! Oh man, the look on your face!
He laughed loudly as he stood up. Relief swept over me, and I smiled too, even though I was thinking about why someone would pull a prank like this on a stranger. Halloween wasn't for months. Then I started thinking about hidden cameras. Maybe this was a YouTube thing. As the man stepped out into the aisle, I looked over toward the woman, expecting her to get up and join the laughter. She didn't move, and the wounds looked so real. The man stopped laughing, and I looked up into his face. He was smiling at me, his big teeth, dull eyes, and narrow face giving him a kind of homely, simple look. His hairline had retreated far up his head, only adding to the look. Expecting him to say something, I looked into his eyes, but he said nothing. His expression didn't change. The train swayed. We looked at each other for what seemed like 15 seconds, a long time to be looking silently at a perfect stranger. Finally, I cleared my throat and gestured at the woman.
She okay? Rachel?
He said.
You okay, honey?
She didn't move, didn't speak.
Rachel?
The man said, his pitch getting louder. Something isn't right here, I thought. The man dropped onto his knees in the aisle, grabbing the woman's arms.
Rachel!
He screamed.
No!
His scream turned to laughter after a long moment. I backed down the aisle, a horrible fear spreading through me. He reached behind his back with his right hand and came out with the kitchen knife he had hidden behind his back. He stood up as he continued laughing.
Of course she's not okay!
He shouted, turning to face me.
She's fucking dead, you idiot! You killed her! You fucking killed her!
He darted toward me, and I turned to run. I came to the newspaper-covered door, slapping at the button as his footsteps boomed toward me. As the door opened, I slipped through sideways, eager for any advantage I could get, but it was no use. Even as I punched the button on the other door, I knew the door behind me wouldn't close before he got to it. Sure enough, I turned around and saw him moving swiftly through the open doorway. Behind me, the second door opened. I backpedaled, hands held up, as the maniac barreled toward me. As he closed the distance, something strange happened. It was almost like I stepped out of my body to see things from a different perspective. It didn't bring a sense of calm with it. I was still more scared than I'd ever been in my entire life. But I knew that it was time to fight or die. I had no formal training. I wasn't a big guy by any means. The maniac had a couple of inches and probably 15 pounds on me. But that didn't mean I was just going to give up and let him kill me. I had to fight. So I crouched on tense legs as he approached. He slowed slightly just before swinging the blade toward me. I jumped back, but I wasn't fast enough. The blade hit the edge of my right hand, opening up my flesh. As he was bringing the blade back the other way, the train started to slow, throwing us both a little off balance. We were approaching the Owens Street station. Shifting my weight, I kicked out with my right foot, aiming for his crotch, but he shifted quickly, and my kick glanced off the inside of his left thigh. The train was slowing faster now, but I was barely aware of it as the maniac threw himself at me. I managed to grab his right wrist in both hands, keeping the knife from plunging into my face. But he kept pushing, and I lost my feet, falling down and slamming my head into the floor. The maniac landed on top of me, his weight forcing the knife blade down. The tip of the blade entered my face on the outside of my left cheekbone. As we hit the floor, it continued down, cutting a ragged line down the left side of my face, then stabbing through my ear and into the floor. I was still gripping his right arm, only now I was preventing him from pulling the arm back up so he could finish the job. Hearing the mechanical sound of the automatic doors opening, I realized the train was fully stopped. We ended up right next to one of the two sets of doors in the train car, and the maniac turned his head to look out the open doors. I turned my head as well, even though it caused the knife to tear through my ear. There was a woman standing there, not much more than a girl, maybe 18 or so. She stood on the platform, staring through the doors at us, shock her only expression. Her eyes bounced between my face and my attacker's. Then the door closing chime sounded, and the doors started to slide close.
Help!
I shouted just before the doors met. It was all I could think to do. Not that it would help me now. The next stop, my stop, was a good 10 minutes away. There was no way I'd live that long. When the train started moving again, the maniac laughed wildly and then resumed trying to pull the knife up. I still had both hands gripping his right arm, which meant his left arm was free. He punched me in the face with his left fist. The blow, painful but far from powerful. Knowing I could take many more of those punches than I could stabs with the knife, I held onto his arm with all I had. My left hand was bleeding where he'd cut me, but the maniac was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, so the blood wouldn't act as a lubricant for him to get free. I could feel the cut along the side of my face bleeding heavily. It burned, and the hearing in my left ear was partially dampened by the blood flowing into the ear canal. I needed a way to get him off me, a way to take the knife from him. Otherwise, I was going to die. The maniac hit me again with his left, then tried to yank his right arm free. He laughed crazily, bending down so his face was inches from mine. His hot breath washed over my face. Before I realized with any sort of coherency what I was doing, I brought my lips together, gathered saliva on my tongue, and then spit into the maniac's mouth. His face went from gleeful psycho killer to disgusted middle-aged man in an instant, and he paused, his muscles going slack with surprise. Whipping my head up, I smashed my forehead into his mouth, feeling his front teeth fold inward with the impact. He jerked backward, and I let go of his arm, knowing that it meant getting him off of me. He fell back with the knife still in his right hand. He brought his left hand to his mouth, which was now filling with blood. Scrambling up, I jumped over the row of seats on the right to get past him. Still partially in shock from the hit, he swung at me lazily from his sitting position, not coming anywhere close to hitting me. For a moment, I thought about trying to end things right then, but he still had the knife and he was still conscious. So instead of staying to fight, I ran. This time, I got through both doors without him coming after me. I hurried past the dead woman on the seats, and when I got a few more rows up, something caught my eye. It was Hassan. His throat had been cut, and his body had been shoved into one of the rows. Rage and sadness clashed inside me as I stood there looking down at the man who'd been nothing but kind to me. I liked Hassan. He was one of the good ones. Behind me, the sound of the door between cars opening sent a warning jolt up my spine. Without looking back, I ran toward the front of the train. It was only when I got to the next set of doors between cars that I glanced over my shoulder. The maniac was smiling again, but he'd pulled out his damaged front teeth, so there was a large gap in his smile. Blood poured down his chin and throat as he ran toward me, knife glinting dangerously in the overhead lights. Slipping through the first door, I turned and looked for some way to lock it, but there was nothing that I could see in my panicked glance. Moving through the second door, I peered around the empty car, searching for anything that could help me, some kind of weapon I could use. My eyes darted towards two emergency handles on one of the windows. The windows were designed so anyone could operate them easily, even when stress and adrenaline were working against them. I read the little stickers over the emergency windows so many times on my rides that I knew just what you were supposed to do. All you had to do was pull the handles, remove the rubber, and then remove the window. I rushed to the window and yanked down on the handles. The rubber around the window came out a few inches, and I yanked again to pull it down further. At the back of the car, the door opened, and the maniac stalked into the train car. I let go of the rubber and grabbed the top of the window pane, pulling it out with some effort. Then I twisted and threw the thing at the maniac as he approached. The glass was designed not to break easily, and it didn't disappoint. It struck the man, making him stumble back before it clattered to the floor. Having bought myself some time, I climbed up into the window and looked at the ground rushing by below. We were going maybe 40 miles an hour. There was a parallel track next to us, and as I glanced toward the front of the train, I saw that another locomotive was coming from the other direction. I had only seconds to jump, and I had to pray I could get off the adjacent tracks in time to not get run over by the passing train. Behind me, the maniac had recovered and was rushing toward me, knife ready to stab. I jumped out the window. Managing to hit the ground feet first likely saved my life. I landed in the middle of the adjacent track, and my feet went out from under me, causing me to roll on the railroad ties, my head narrowly missing the hard metal track. Pain shot through me, and the wind left my lungs in a whoosh. The bright light from the speeding train lit my surroundings, and the train horn blared. The sound of heavy machinery filled my ears as the vehicle closed the distance. Scrambling up, I launched myself off the tracks a split second before the train flew past. Covering my head, I lay in the ditch next to the tracks and waited for the train to roar past. When it was finally gone, I raised my head and looked around. The area was silent. Both trains had gone their separate directions. In a moment of panic, I imagined the maniac lunging from the greenery on the other side of the tracks, bearing down on me to finish the job. But the area remained silent as I got to my feet. Pulling out my phone to call the police, I wasn't entirely surprised to find that the phone had been smashed when I jumped off the train. I limped to the side of the tracks and pushed through the foliage. After walking for 5 minutes into the neighborhood, I realized I wasn't far from my house. Once I got home, I could use my brother's phone to call the police and the paramedics. Then I would wait for them to arrive in the comfort of my own bed. As I limped down the silent street, I touched the cut on my face. It wasn't bleeding so much anymore, although my ear was still dripping blood onto my shoulder, soaking my shirt. My hand wasn't bleeding much anymore either. I still had my keys in my pocket, so I got into the house easily. My brother was asleep, and I didn't want to wake him. The last thing I needed was him freaking out over my appearance. I would have to comfort him and calm him down. That could wait. I slipped into his room and grabbed his phone from the nightstand. Then I called 911 and gave them the whole story. When that was done, I collapsed into my bed. I slipped into sweet oblivion for what seemed like seconds when the sound of footsteps woke me up. I lifted my head off the bed and looked toward my bedroom door. A man stood there, backlit by the hallway light. At first, I thought it was a police officer, but then I noticed the backpack sitting on the floor next to his foot. It was my backpack, the one I'd left on the train, with my wallet inside. The man reached over and flipped the light on. The maniac stood there, bloody mouth grinning, knife glinting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.